and today Brian and I are here with Steve Taranovich. He is a former design engineer of 42 years and author of the recent release, Guardians of the Right Stuff. Hi, Steve. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Nicolette. I appreciate it. This will be a lot of fun for me.
So, Steve, tell us a little bit about your background and ultimately, the journey to Guardians of the Right Stuff.
Sure. I started out as, I got my master's of engineering at New York University. I'm a Long Island boy, New York born and raised pretty much. And then I went into a few different areas of design. I started out in audio design, amplifiers and things like that, and went into the other end of the spectrum, microwave design. And then I joined Burr Brown and Texas Instruments, which were semiconductor companies. And I was apps engineer and corporate account manager worldwide for some big companies for a long time. Ultimately, I got into writing in 2011. It's kind of weird, for an engineer to be, I'm kind of really crazy about spelling and grammar and stuff like that. That's unusual for engineers. But
yes.
But what happened is, I started, I did a couple of articles when I was at Texas Instruments, tech articles. And then I got into writing as a way of teaching. I always I love teaching and stuff. And I had an opportunity to be an adjunct professor at an engineering school or to go into writing. And I said, you know what, writing's a way of teaching. And I'm so happy I went down that road.
Yeah, it's amazing because I've always related the same thing. Like writing, you spend so much time educating other people, like educating yourself sometimes on a topic, and then sharing that information with other people. So it's definitely a huge form of teaching. That's
so true. Yep, definitely. And so it's something, like I said, I really enjoy and got into it. Not really regarding the book. It was something where it started out as an idea for an article. I mean, growing up as a kid, I enjoyed the space program. That's what got me to become an electrical engineer. At 11 years old in the early 60s, watching TV when the Mercury program was launching single astronauts to orbit the Earth, and later on Gemini, 2 astronauts went up in a space capsule, orbited, and then ultimately the Apollo program. And I just like, wow, I got to be part of this. I'm 11 years old and I'm like, I want to be in the electronics part of this whole deal, Mm-hmm. So but the book came about where, like I said, it was an article, and I said I want to write an article, and I went to visit my family on Long Island where Grumman Corporation is located. And Grumman Corporation was they had the job of creating the lunar module, the landing module that would leave the command spacecraft, the Apollo spacecraft that would orbit the moon with 1 astronaut, and then 2 astronauts would land on the moon. So Grumman had that job. And so I said, let me interview these guys, and I'll go there and and see what their story is. And it's what happened is, started out at what's called the Cradle of Aviation. Mm-hmm. It's a museum for Long Island, New York, aircraft and space development. So I called a bunch of people I knew from Grumman, the Grumman Retirees Group. I had known some people there, and I got a bunch of fellas that came in, sat down at the Cradle of Aviation, who gave us a conference room, and we just, my wife Loretta, she's my photographer and wife of 42 years, and she's there snapping photos of everyone, and all her photos are in the book, and of all the interviewees. And we just sat and talked about what they did on the space program. And these are people who were, there are lots of books on astronauts who are certainly the heroes of the Apollo program. And of the astronauts who go to space today as well. I mean, these are the heroes, and but and a lot of books are also written about besides astronauts, some of the upper management people in NASA and things like that, and that's all great and informational stories. But I hadn't seen anything really about the people at the ground level, the simple people who do the the little tasks that really make it safe for the astronauts. And that's where the Guardians of the Right Stuff came from. These are guardians of the right stuff astronauts. What they did, their dedication and caring for what they were doing, helped make those astronauts safe.
Right.
So and that was where it all began there. So anyway, so I go through the interviews with everybody and stuff, all the Grumman people there, the retirees, and they're great stories. I mean, just incredible stories that many people have never heard. And at the end, so I said, so have any of you guys written a book or anything on this? I said, I'm going to be doing an article, but have you written a book? And they said, no, you have to write the book. I said, well, I never wrote a book, but you're a writer and you're an engineer, so you understand what we did. So we want you to write the book. So I was like, oh, well, I'll think about it. I wasn't really keen on it because I've never written a book. I know how much work it would be, so, all right. So that's fine. I go off and, talking to my wife, Loretta, and one thing led to another. I'm like, you know what? Maybe I can expand this a little bit beyond an article about Grumman and the lunar module. And I have good contacts within NASA over my years of, working as an engineer and also a tech writer. And I said, let me see if I can get some information about some of the NASA side of things.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing led to another. Loretta and I go on this like multi-thousand-mile road trip in the U.S. from Arizona to the White Sands Missile Range, the NASA White Sands rocket test range, actually in New Mexico, in the White Sands base, and we interviewed people there. We found people through NASA who were retirees, and then we drove on into the hills of Texas, where there were more retirees in their homes, and ultimately into Houston, where NASA opened their doors to us. They let us have the archives, go into the archive section. They gave us conference rooms to interview people, and that led to more and more information in the book, and expanded the whole thing that turned into the Guardians of the Right Stuff. And all these people had the same kind of ethic. They all were, the story behind the story of the moon landing, and it was just a labor of love, and to work with these people. And they just, when I interviewed them, they would kind of, and these guys are all in their 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. And so as I interviewed them, I could see their face turn into the 20-year-old person that worked on the Apollo program. And that was the fun of it. They just like poured out their stories. So it was really, really neat stuff. And, I have a few kind of special people that really struck me. One of the things, I know you have some questions. I'm sorry to just go on. I could talk all day on this because I love this stuff. So anyway, there was this one situation where one of the fellas who was a rocket scientist, a rocket science designer, really, and he lived in the hill. This fellow Henry Pohl, he lived in the hills of Texas, and he was one of the people on our list. So I talked to him and I said, Henry, so where do you live? How do I get there? Oh, okay. He says, don't GPS it. Don't try to GPS my address. I'm going to send you a list of turn by turn directions and stuff. So I'm like, all right, so it sends me this list, and it's like turn here at this gas station, and turn left on County Road, blah blah blah, and then there's the red school bus, and I'm like, suddenly I'm on like a dirt road, and we're driving and driving, and I come up to this like, we're driving forever. Texas like never ends, so we're driving forever, and here's this fence I come to with an opening in it, and I'm like, and his direction said, go past the cattle guard. So I'm like, I turned to my wife, I'm like, Loretta, what's a cattle guard? I'm from Brooklyn. What do I know about what's a cattle guard? Is it like a guy sitting on the fence with a shotgun, a cowboy? Yeah. So I'm like, so what the heck's a cattle guard? So I said, well, we don't know. So I look to the right, the fence goes on forever. I look to the left, it goes on forever the other way. And I'm like, all right, let's go through the opening. Let's see where we can go. Continue down this road. One thing led to another. We get to Henry's house, driving forever, because it turned from grass to rock, gravel, to a dirt road, and suddenly we come upon this nice little ranch house, and there's Henry standing on the porch, barefoot, in jeans and a white t-shirt, and he's waving at us. So, and we got in there and did the interview, and Henry, like every other person we met, has kind of an Apollo shrine in their homes, and these people opened up their homes to us. It was just like, the hospitality was incredible. It was so much fun.
It's interesting. Because obviously, like if I worked on tube, I would have a shrine in my house, absolutely. Because but I think one of the things that like a lot of people don't realize, especially in engineering, like how long they actually worked on those things and how many hours they put in. Especially you talked about safety. How much time they did with testing to accomplish these great things.
Absolutely.
I think that's one of the biggest things like a lot of people miss. It's not like they just were like, oh, we're going to create a rocket ship and go. They spend, years and years and years testing individual components or pieces of that,
Right. I remember President Kennedy said, we want to put a man on the moon before the end of this decade, the 60s decade. And these people, they sacrificed their family lives, their families made a sacrifice. And they could have been paid more money outside of NASA doing stuff, but they loved what they were doing, and they saw the goal, and they were so dedicated, and they did it. It's incredible. This story came, there was the Apollo 1 tragedy, the fire that happened and killed 3 of the astronauts. It was very unfortunate. And my story, my book, comes kind of after that. I give a little bit of, background and stuff like that, but my book is actually everything most of the things that occurred after the fire.
Right.
Other books were written about the fire, the astronaut fire and stuff. And, it was unfortunate, but what happened with NASA after the fire is they said, we have to do something to make a change, because that space capsule, it was in a pure oxygen atmosphere. The hatch opened in, and with the this was a test run with 3 of the astronauts, and they were Virgil Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, and it was just a test run, and they're in this oxygen atmosphere, and apparently there was a spark, and what happened is, it was pressurized, the test. They're on the ground in Kennedy Space Center, Florida, in the ground test that they were doing, but they're sealed into the space capsule. Spark comes, fire, comes from the spark, and the hatch was supposed to open in, like I said, that was the design. With the pressure, they couldn't open it. They couldn't pull it in. The pressure was, excuse me, too high. And the fire just took its toll, unfortunately. So after that, NASA said, all right, we need to change everything. No pure oxygen atmosphere anymore. We do a mixture, of air for the astronauts. We have the hatch to open out. That's another story in the book, the fellow who developed that hatch. And we start a test lab in White Sands Rocket Test Range in New Mexico. And we're going to test all the materials that go on the spacecraft and make sure that they're safe for flight. Excuse me. So that's what the story came about.
So with all of these stories, what would you say was the most amazing to you? And I use that term loosely because they're all amazing, but what were you really what did you really learn? Like, what was the thing you felt like, wow, I really didn't know that, and that's really cool?
Probably it was mostly the thing that struck me mostly was the dedication of these people. I mean, they loved what they were doing. They had the astronauts in their mind constantly. It's what we're doing, whether we're putting heat shielding around the spacecraft, doing the communications, rocket engines, whatever little things here and there, some manuals and charts that go inside the spacecraft. They all had this just a tremendous dedication to meeting the deadline before the end of the 60s, and also keeping the astronauts safe, making this thing fly safely. There was some people who I really, besides Henry Pohl, that I mentioned, there was a Marine Colonel, Jack Lausma. He was a pilot, Marine Colonel, who became a pilot and ultimately an astronaut. He was one of the astronauts. And Jack Lausma, what he did, which was unusual, he didn't go to the moon. He wound up being assigned as a test guy. Had his astronaut training, and of course, like I said, he was a pilot, but he would test out everything before the astronauts would get into the spacecraft. So he would test out all the little designs, the lunar module. They had a module, they had a lunar module that would actually fly on Earth, little test module with feet and stuff. And he would fly that just to make sure it's safe. It crashed a number of times with him in it. He's a great guy though, really great guy. And we met him up in the hills of Texas as well. He comes to our hotel. I see him drive up to the hotel. He's in a red sports car. The guy's a fighter jock, so, and he's an astronaut. So, and one thing interesting about him too, with these kind of people, they all have great stories, but Jack was, he did a movie. He was kind of involved technically in a movie called A Smile as Big as the Moon. It was a special ed group of children, younger kids, at space camp, and they were to go into a contest at space camp with a whole bunch of other groups around the country. And Jack trained these kids. He taught them, because they were from the same state as he was. I believe it was Michigan. And he trained them and taught them kind of what to expect. And these kids won a prize up there. It was pretty amazing. Oh. So Jack, and this is just one little story, behind the person who kept the astronauts safe, the guardians.
So what do you think? We have a lot of people who listen in who are writers, right? Now you mix technical and writing, and that's another story altogether, because we're always fascinated by engineers that are great writers, because we were actually just talking to someone who specializes in that. And what is it? We know such brilliant engineers, but they can't get it out of their head, and and it doesn't sound right, but they have all of this knowledge. So I mean, I guess what is it that makes that happen for you? What?
Not just knowledge, creativity also.
Right,
I think
right. And it's so difficult to get it on
creativity-
paper. Right. What makes that? I mean, did you have any interest in writing before early on in your life?
None whatsoever. It was
So
never
cool.
never a thing. It just came naturally to me. I guess just in
Mhm.
school, grammar school, at the university. I took some English courses and stuff. Never a writing course or anything. Um, but for me, it was, ultimately after my engineering days and during my engineering days, I would teach by helping designers design their systems,
Mhm.
when I was with Texas Instruments and Burr Brown and stuff like that. So it's, in a way, it was teaching,
Right.
so, and,
Well,
and
what would you say to an engineer who's reluctant to write? They don't want to get involved with that, but maybe they have to, or they should, or whatever it might be.
absolutely, I mean, I would strongly encourage, people, especially, if an engineer or any other people who wanted to write that are not writers, um, you'd have to get somebody who could help you with the grammar, punctuation, things like that. Somebody to edit your book, but write what's in your soul. You know, write what you pick something you love. You have to do that. It's got to be something you really, really love and you're passionate about. And with that, you can't go wrong. I mean, just write down what's in your head. It doesn't come in a day or 2 days or 3 days. Typically you have to walk away from writing. You'll be writing an hour maybe or whatever. Put your thoughts down. Even record it if you want. And that's a good way to do it. But you'd need, if you're not good in spelling and grammar, you get somebody to edit it for you. And there's lots of people around for that. And but there are people out there, and you're right, Nicolette, is they've got great stories to tell, but they're not writers. So you have to, if you're not a writer, you have to find somebody to help you with that. And there's lots of ways to do that. There are different groups on the internet and stuff you could join and stuff.
Well,
So-
you also have a background in freelance technical writing. Now, we know working with freelancers, sometimes you get stuff you don't exactly love, but you want to make money, and the material. So
Yeah.
how is that writing, right? How do you, as an engineer, then approach that writing that kind of feels less fun, as opposed to writing a book? I mean, how do you grind through that then?
Well, there's a switch inside my brain that I turn when I turn that switch when I write a super technical mind. It'll make your brain bleed type article with
Yes.
with tremendous amount of equations and graphs
Mhm.
and all kinds of stuff. Technical information,
Yes.
and that's my engineering side of my brain. To write this book, Guardians of Right Stuff, it was kind of in the middle almost, because there's a little bit of technical. I didn't want to make it too technical because I wanted it to be more general, especially to target people who are interested in the space program. Okay, we're in the middle of a great program now with Artemis, the sister of Apollo. She's the goddess of the moon, so but I want to inspire younger people. I think this book is great for that, for them to understand what kind of people did this exciting work and what they accomplished in such a short period of time. So, I want that to encourage younger people, but even, older people who reminisce about, their experiences of, the space program, or people who didn't actually physically experience it, that are kind of in between,
Mhm.
who might have an interest, so that's what's important. And I think this book, I wrote it that way, from, it's a little bit of an engineering side, but more of the kind of human interest story, the story behind the story.
I think there are two steps in getting people interested in space. First, you read Steve's book, then you visit NASA. You visit a NASA facility, right? Because we've all been there. All three of us have been to various NASA facilities. They're awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely, for sure. And even museums, the space museums that are around in Washington, D.C., the one on Long Island, Cradle of Aviation is amazing. And they really, that's where, like I said, this book started there. And so it was pretty interesting. And, like I said, there are a lot of interesting people that I interviewed. One other fella I just want to mention, a guy named Dave Pippin. He was a guy that what he always said was, sure, we can do it. He's the guy who actually, he ran, when they opened up that special, after Apollo 1 fire, they opened up the lab in Las Cruces, New Mexico, on White Sands Missile and Rocket Test Range. Dave lived there. He lived there. And he joined the group when the test program started for the Apollo program. So, and he was always like, yeah, with his team, he'd say, we can do it. And then he'd say, he'd tell his management, they'd want him to do something. And he said, we can do it. And his team, he'd go to his team and say, how are we going to do this?
That sounds like Brian. Brian does that with our clients.
Oh, really? And that's like,
before. Yeah, I'm sort of that way.
You find a way, right?
We're smart people. We can figure it out.
Yeah. And then that often results in you like, how the hell are we going to do this, Brian? I don't understand.
That's exactly. So, what he did is he blew things up and set fire to things and tested toxicity of materials. But one story in his early career, he's working at NASA. He gets a job as a young fella at NASA, and it's on the Apollo program. And there's on the Apollo, the top of the Apollo spacecraft that's mounted on the booster rocket, right? On the top is an escape module. It's an escape rocket engine that, in the event that during launch or even before launch, there's a problem and could endanger the astronauts, the space capsule will disconnect from the giant booster, which is a huge potential for explosion with all that rocket fuel on it. He worked on that program on that. Was called what was it? Little Joe. So he worked on that program, and one of the tests that he did, he's an electrical engineer, but he did other mechanical tests as well. One of the tests he did is the rocket sitting on a launch pad area. It's locked down, so they can fire the engine, but it won't take off. Okay. Mm-hmm. But they fire the engine and they're moving the fins on the rocket. And this rocket, like I said, is going to control getting the astronauts away from danger and parachute down to Earth safely somewhere, during a problem, if a problem occurs. So he's testing that, and the rockets they're working the fins and stuff. And he has his college ring on, and he taps the fin of the rocket, one of the fins, the 4 fins of the rocket. He taps it, and it just like goes, wow! It like vibrates like crazy. It almost like the whole spacecraft started shaking. Wow. So one thing leads to the other, where he's called into a meeting with the whole team that's working on the rocket, and the managers are there. And one of the key managers says, Dave Pippin? Who's Dave Pippin? And Dave kind of raises his hand and says, come forward, Mr. Pippin. Were you the guy who did the ring test on the spacecraft? And he says, yep, I did. He says, were you authorized to do that? No, sir. So no one gave you authority to do this? No, sir. So, but as it turned out, this ring test, when he hit it with his college ring, he hit what's called a resonance. Mm-hmm. And if he hadn't done that, and they never tested that rocket for resonance, it would have been a total disaster when they ultimately launched it. It would just go out of control totally. So he prevented that from happening. And, you know, that was like the beginning of his story, but he's that kind of guy where he like, let's try this, you know, how are we going to do it? Well, let's try this, you know, and it worked out fantastic because thank God, no other astronauts ever were hurt or had disasters after Apollo 1.
That's great.
So.
It's awesome. Dave Pippin's my type of guy.
Yeah, that's Brian in a nutshell.
Totally related to him right from that story.
I think so.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
Steve,
true.
we thank you so much for working on this and sharing the story. And we'd love for you to tell everybody where we can learn more about you and the book.
Where we could
Learn more about you and your book. Where can we get that?
I guess you go on Amazon, you know, for it. And I'm putting things on LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and stuff. And I'm hoping to go look into a possibility of I'm in discussions with NASA now. I want to get, you know, the book maybe into bookstores and museums, maybe things like that.
Nice.
And it's not the kind of thing that, you know, I'm not going to make a lot of money on it. I'm not looking to be a bestseller. I want people to have the book and just enjoy what happened and learn from it, and maybe, you know, spur them on to do something that they might be, you know, reluctant to do now, like write a book or whatever they might be hesitating to do, you know, especially some of the younger people, you know. So I think it would be a good lesson for them.
I think one of the amazing things I think you're doing is preserving some of our history that may otherwise be lost, right?
Yeah.
And inspiring a lot
Yeah.
of people, you know, that if you
Yeah.
weren't doing what you were doing, you know, those things may be lost, you know, so we appreciate that. And thank you, Steve.
Yep. No problem. Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk to you guys. I could go on forever, but thank you for the opportunity and keeping me in control. So
No worries. You don't have to go on forever because we'll put the links in the description here, and everybody can just read about it. So don't worry.
We'll put a link to your book so everyone can see where they can pick it up.
Yep.
well, thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.